I go on to say that we will also take special notice of how Jesus' words here in Matthew are precisely paralleled in his revelation to the Apostle John in the book of Revelation, chapter 17. And this is very important as well. This part right now is not a deep dive, although this study will include a chart that we're going to see here that will show these very important parallels between what Yeshua says in the Matthew, Mark, and Luke accounts when compared against the book of Revelation chapter 6 and 7, dealing with the 7 seals on the outside of the scroll that we talked about earlier. So when we get to that part, I want you to pay careful attention to how these two narratives, these two eschatological stories or details and chapters in the Bible parallel one another on purpose. It's not an accident. It's not mere coincidence. Number one, it's the same author, right? Yeshua in both places. And number two, it's God and his Holy Spirit who have authored these details for us so that we can be prepared. So what Yeshua tells his disciples before the 70 AD account is mirrored by or paralleled by what he tells John, which is, in my understanding, after the 70 AD event, which means even though there's some parallel between the chapters, we realize that the 70 AD destruction of the temple has already taken place by the time John starts penning his words. And so most of John's, in fact, all of John's details are now future facing. And then, but we're still operating under the idea that it's the same author. Yeshua gave these same words, and yet there are parallels because of the prophetic telescoping nature of apocalyptic literature. Did I just confuse anyone? I hope I didn't. All right. This will make more sense once we get into it. All right. And as I mentioned in this last part, part 1, as I mentioned, covers verses 1 through 24, while part 2 will cover verses 25 through 51. I got a typo there. Part 1 will covers. Sorry about that. Okay. Just ignore that part. All right. So historical context. Let's look. This is real quick. I mean, blink and you're going to miss it. This part isn't really a deep dive. The historical context of Matthew 24. Matthew 24 takes place during the last week of Jesus' life, just before his crucifixion. He's in Jerusalem, I say, with his disciples, and they are discussing the temple and its destruction. So it's that whole thing that I just mentioned about Jerusalem, and then you zoom in, and then Israel, then you zoom in, then it's Jerusalem, then you zoom in a little bit more, and it's the temple that's the center of focus. I just go on to say that Jesus uses this opportunity to teach them about the end times and what they can expect before his return. Yeah, pretty short. I didn't feel the need at the moment to turn this into a history lesson, although if you want to go deeper into the history of why Yeshua had this discussion with them on the mount right there, well, you can do so on your own. Let's talk a little bit about interpretations, because this is going to drive how we understand what these words mean and how they impact us and how we can look for a practical application for our very lives. Because again, what it boils down to is if the words that Yeshua gave us in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, the Olivet Discourse, if those words were already 100% filled up in the 70 AD destruction of the temple, like the preterists say, like we're going to read about here in a moment, well then, as we get to John's Revelation, we also have to force chapters 6 and 7 of the book of Revelation into that same preterist mind frame. And again, indeed the preterists, well, at least the hyper or full-blown preterists do this. They just take most of the book of Revelation, indeed I think all of it, and they just say it's really all done, it's done away with. It creates really manifold challenges, in my opinion. So let's begin to look at these interpretations, and so we'll just jump right into it right here. We've talked about this, by the way, briefly in the past, but because of the nature of what we're going to be looking at, I thought it worth reminding us. There are several different interpretations, I mentioned, of Matthew 24, and scholars have debated its meaning for centuries. Here are some of the most common interpretations. So I'm going to list 4, and I've got a little graphic on the screen that I can, not on the screen now, but I can flash it later on in post-production that shows these 4. Right, the preterist, well, I won't mention them yet. You'll see them here in a moment. So just pay attention. Whichever version you go with, it's on you. I'm not going to try and force you to hold to a different position, although I'm going to make a case for one position over the other that I think makes the most sense and is the best way to understand the material that we're dealing with. I am going to try and emphasize that and make a push for it, but in the end, it truly doesn't matter, as I understand, which position you hold to, because what matters most is if you're a genuine Christian, if you genuinely know the true Messiah, the true Christ, Yeshua himself. If you have a relationship with him and the Holy Spirit has taken up residency inside of you, right, the Spirit of God lives in you, and you're a student of the Word, and you are availing yourself of God's revelation to you during these days in which we live, then even if you hold to a preterist position, you still should be prepared for Yeshua's second coming. Be prepared to lose your life, right, at the uprising of the tribulations right around the corner. Whether you believe it's there or not, or whether you believe it's on its way or not, the point being is your faith in Yeshua is what's going to prepare you, not your own mental exercise of figuring out which interpretation is better, not that you have become a preterist versus a futurist or an idealist or a historicist, or et cetera, et cetera. Those positions are good to help you understand the Bible, and I really do believe that some of them are going to help you be better prepared, one position versus the other. But ultimately, in the end, your relationship with God through his son Yeshua is the single most important detail that's going to get you through what is right around the corner, whether you believe it's going to be a really tough time, whether you believe we're just going to kind of slide smoothly into the second coming of Jesus and ushering in of the millennial kingdom. All right, so pay attention to the views, but focus on Jesus. Get your eyes focused on him, right? Don't get your eyes distracted by, well, that view doesn't believe what I believe, so I'm just going to go around making sure that my view is correct. Nope, it doesn't work that way. All right, so let's talk about the first view. They're in no particular order. They're just whichever views I decided to put in my essay. Preterist, and this comes from the Latin word for praeter, which means past, right? Praeter, something that's already in the past, it's already happened, i.e., let's just read it. This view holds that most of the events in Matthew 24 were fulfilled in the first century, specifically with the destruction of the temple in AD 70. Proponents of this view argue that Jesus was predicting the judgment that would come upon Israel for rejecting him as the Messiah. Let me add that last little part there before I had to scroll up. So, preterists, there are 2 main flavors of preterism. There's the what we might call hyper preterism or full preterism, where most, if not all, of the events that Jesus describes in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the entire book of Revelation, all of this is in the past, already happened. Destruction of Jerusalem, the Antichrist, the resurrection from the dead, the rapture, the kingdom being established or something. I mean, it at some point in time, as you can probably detect, full-blown preterism tips over into heresy. Yeah, because of the way that Scripture has to be completely kind of spiritualized in order to account for a lot of the details of the book of Revelation to actually have taken place, like the devil being bound for 1,000 years, etc., etc. So I'm going to probably caution you away from full-blown preterism. However, the other flavor of preterism, which is partial preterism, there are some details about partial preterism that we can glean to our benefit, even if you're not a partial preterist, particularly if you're not a partial preterist, if you hold to one of the other views. Indeed, as we're going to find out, the words that Yeshua left for us in the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and others, the Olivet Discourse, as well as the book of Revelation, we're going to find out that some of those events actually match what took place in 70 AD. Yeah, okay. So So we can benefit from looking at history past and realize that there was partial fulfillment. If you're not a preterist, then you can just describe it that way. Yeah, the preterists have some leg to stand on because the 70 AD events did take place. It's not like we are denying that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD and that Jerusalem was plowed under in the 130s with the revolts. No, we're not denying that happened. We agree. And we also agree that Yeshua forecasted or foretold that these things would happen. So that's preterism. Let's look at the second view that I have on my list here. Again, these are in no particular order. The futurist view. This view holds that most of the events in Matthew 24 are still in the future, thus its name, and will be fulfilled during the end times. Proponents of this view argue that Jesus was predicting the events that will occur just before his return, including the rise of the Antichrist and the Great Tribulation. Now, I need to add something before I tell you which view I hold to. When I wrote those words about, let me scroll, there we go. When I wrote the words about predicting the events that will occur just before his return, I didn't have a heavy emphasis on the idea of near-far prophetic telescoping. At least 25 years ago, I wasn't making that as much of a point as I do now. Although, now that I've come back and that I'm redoing this study after 25 years, I realize that I have to emphasize this more and more because it becomes a bit confusing unless you're aware of this. When we talk about the return of Yeshua, right, those of us who are not preterists, when we talk about the return of Yeshua, we have to account for the fact that there are two primary aspects to his second return, or his second coming, his return, right? So Yeshua, essentially, from the overall historical perspective, is going to visit planet Earth 2 times. He came once in the first century, that was 2,000 years ago, and he's going to come again, as we believe, very shortly, to usher in his millennial kingdom. So that's 2 comings of the Messiah, something that the ancient Jewish people and even the Jewish people of today are still blinded to, right? They only see one Messiah or they see no Messiah. And for those who did see 2 significant events, they sometimes got confused and thought it was actually 2 messiahs. But what we as Christians understand is that there's one Messiah and 2 arrivals or 2 visits to planet Earth. One time when he was a baby, 2,000 years ago, grew up and was crucified on a cross and then ascended to heaven. And now he's in heaven waiting to return to usher in his kingdom. So that's the second return. But as we zero in and zoom in on the second coming, right, his return the second time, his return to planet Earth, there are 2 primary aspects to the return, which I believe are marked out by the rapture and the physical return to planet Earth, where his feet touch the ground and where he returns with the saints. So don't get confused when we're looking at these details in Matthew 25, where Yeshua is talking about his return. There's the prophetic telescoping template that we have to account for, where there's some language that's going to be reused, and yet at the same time, we have to account for the fact that when he's talking about his second coming, when he talks about his return, is he talking about his return to snatch the saints away? Or is he talking about his return to bring the saints back with him who've already been taken up to heaven, and he's going to usher in his millennial kingdom? And there's some events that take place between those 2 aspects, the rapture and the ushering in of his kingdom. So this is what we're going to begin to try to peel back eventually as we're getting closer and closer to the book of Revelation part of our study. We'll begin to look at this more and more. So I thought I'd introduce that to you right now. Let's keep reading this essay. This third particular view, 3 out of 4, again, no particular order, is the historicist view. This view holds that Matthew 24 is a prophecy that spans the entire course of history from the first century to the end times. Proponents of this view argue that the events Jesus describes in all 3 of these accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that these events that are described have been unfolding throughout history and will culminate in his return. And again, as you're probably detecting as I'm reading these particular interpretations, there's a little bit of truth to all of them. We could almost take a fifth view, which is known as the eclectic view, where we take all four and we just kind of glean what makes sense from all four and reject that which doesn't seem to harmonize. That might be an eclectic perspective. There are those who take that view, and then there are those who take the unspoken sixth view. This is tongue-in-cheek. I'm saying this, right? This is not, I'm saying this in irony. They take the unspoken sixth tongue-in-cheek view, which is the pan-rapturous view or pan-eschatological view, which means everything will just pan out in the end. I don't have to worry about it. God will figure it out because that's his job. Okay, no, that's not a view that any of us really should be taking, but sadly that is a view that many people who simply are apathetic and don't really have the interest in end-time prophecy just tend to take. Well, I read the Bible, and that's good enough, and God will work everything out. I don't have to worry. Taken to an extreme, that's what we would describe. But again, I'm not trying to insult those who say, I don't need to worry because I actually fully do trust God. Maybe that is their perspective because they're saying, I can't figure this out. It's too difficult for me, too many details. So I'm just going to sit back, trust God, and he will work everything out. There actually is some benefit to that perspective, and I'm not trying to mock those who have that view. I'm trying to simply alert you to the fact that there are people who simply say, well, I'm a lazy Christian, and I just don't have the time to study through all this stuff. So that's the view I'm trying to warn you away from. And then last, the fourth of four views that I'm highlighting here in this short little essay is the idealist view. This view holds that Matthew 24 is a symbolic description of the struggle between good and evil throughout history. As you can see from the wording, it's very similar to the historicist view that I just read above, but this one even takes a further step back and just says, well, we don't even have to look for really historical events like the rise and fall of empires and world leaders and the natural disasters that have been taking place on planet Earth for a long time, for 2,000 years. We don't even have to look at those events as really being physical events. Everything's really just symbolic of the struggle in the heavens between good and evil. I go on to say that proponents of this view argue that the events that Jesus describes are not meant to be taken literally, but represent spiritual truths. This view is really easy to adopt, especially when you get to the book of Revelation. You start reading about lions and tigers and bears, oh my, right? Lots of dragons with lots of heads and lots of horns and lots of crowns. And, locusts demons that look like locusts with stingers in their tails and hair like women. And I mean, it gets really crazy. And so it's no wonder that people say, well, there's no way that John could have been describing, stars falling from the sky to earth. The stars fell from the sky, falling to the earth. Well, we know that if even one star hit the earth, that's it. Bye-bye, planet Earth. So John couldn't be describing literal stars. Maybe he's describing meteorites, right? Or meteoritic activity or something like that. Shooting stars, what we call it. All right, even that's metaphorical, right? They're not really shooting stars. They're falling pieces of glowing rock that are hitting the earth. So it's no wonder that people take this particular view where they say, well, none of that's really literal. None of that's going to happen in real life. It just represents kind of this spiritual dimension that we can't see. It's invisible. All right, well, I didn't even tell you which view I hold to. Well, you probably already know. This one, the one I've got parked in front of my screen right now. I hold to the futurist view. I think that most of the events that we're going to be studying in this look at the Olivet Discourse and eventually the book of Revelation, I think most of them are still future. But I recognize the benefit of the other three views, particularly the preterist and the historicist view. I don't find a lot of use for the idealist view myself. Personally, I'm just not a fan of spiritualizing a lot of the scriptures away. I'm more of a literalist myself, so I favor the futurist view. I recognize the benefits and the contributions that the historicist view brings to the table, as well as the preterist view as well. But the futurist view is the one that I adopt as my hermeneutic. So we're going to work from that perspective.